her presentation on risky play among school-aged children. And just as a reminder to everyone, we couldn't record the first session of today's webinar because of the ethical restrictions around recording GoPro footage, but the rest of the webinar will be recorded. So with that, Janet, Dr. Loebach, please take it away.
Great, thanks. And I'm sharing my screen, is that correct?
Yes, that's great.
Yes, great, okay. And actually my colleague Adina is here, but she's leaving shortly. We are in San Francisco right now doing some behavior mapping in children's outdoor play spaces. So I'm going to just get my presentation going here. I apologize, I'm on one screen, which I'm not normally. And so sharing is, and Louise, maybe you can just give me a heads up that you're seeing it and the whole thing.
It says started screen sharing. Oh, now we can see it. That's perfect.
There we go. Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. Well, depending where you are, I'm really happy to be here. Really appreciate the invitation to share some of our work. So I am presenting on behalf of Adina and myself. And what we're going to share today is some work that we have been doing, or we have done, at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. They have a really large, wonderful outdoor natural play space in the back. Now, it is mostly natural. There are some manufactured elements. And so we spent a couple summers there doing some behavior mapping, some observations. And one of the pieces that we're looking at right now is certainly risk-taking behavior during play. So our overall goal was to look at, what are the characteristics of an outdoor natural playscape that supports different types of outdoor play behaviors for children, and particularly what are those environmental features and conditions that are really supporting or prompting particularly really diverse forms of play. And as I said, one of our areas that we're focusing on right now is risk taking during that work. So just to give you a little overview, this is a plan of the backyard, and what we did to capture our data. What we're sharing today is just from one of the summers. We have been there for a couple summers, but we use the place-based behavior mapping approach, which I will explain a bit more in a minute. We did observations over 7 days in July, so this time when locally they were on summer break, and so it was sort of peak use time for the space. And just point out some of the different features. You can see there's a lot of different diverse settings within the space. They did have quite a bit of sort of natural loose parts, but then there were also some manufactured loose parts that were available, such as plastic boats and binoculars, these little paleo explorer kits where they could sort of investigate and dig through rocks and dirt piles. I'm just going to show you a couple of images that will be a little bit easier. So you get a sense. There was one sort of large stump circle area in a shaded, large shaded space. See, there was a sloping entrance ramp that winds around the space. In the lower left, we had a kind of rudimentary mud kitchen. Importantly, though, it did have a working faucet. And one of the other features of this area is that they had a caged bird area. They actually had Audubon volunteers and naturalists who would periodically bring the birds out and have them in the space that the kids and families could come and engage. But the space was really primarily, the sort of main focal feature was this really large sloping creek. It was a working creek. It was manufactured, it was being fed, and it sloped quite a bit down the space with these really large boulders all the way down the space. In the top right hand, there was a little sort of natural loose parts build area, and then just a dry creek bed that was also aligning the other creek space. So just to share a little bit about, for those of you who aren't familiar with behavior mapping, So this is an intensive field observation method protocol. You have a systematic protocol, so you can really robustly capture behavior that's occurring in the space. But it's one of the few tools that lets us collect data at the same time of both human behavior and the environmental context where behavior is occurring. And so there are different ways you can map behavior. You can, if you're looking for a particular type of behavior, for example, if we were only looking at risky play, we might only map when we saw that, versus what we did do, which is a time contingent approach. And so we have certain periods of time and we capture all behavior that occurs in that space. And we were really interested in capturing what's the full kind of diversity of play that's happening in this space. But behavior mapping lets us capture you can capture different variables, different attributes of interest. And so one of them for us was risk-taking behavior. So the other thing about behavior mapping that's a huge benefit, it's really sensitive to fine-grained data if you have good observational measures. But it's really flexible and it's customizable. So it's basically a framework in which you slot in, what are the types of behaviors that we are interested in. So we can capture information on play behavior, we can capture information on the environmental context, we can capture information on the child themselves, and it gives us this really great holistic picture, but it's also spatially located. And so we can actually look at behaviors in space, which is incredibly valuable. But it also, just a plug for behavior mapping, it integrates really well with other types of data. So, we regularly incorporate photo and video data, but through timestamps, you can also pair it to accelerometry if you're really interested in objective measures of physical activity, GPS loggers. If you do a play-centered approach, they lends itself really well to more longitudinal analyses. So you can look at differences across seasons or different conditions. And a person-centered approach is where you're actually following, rather than just looking at all the play that's happening by whoever is in a space at a time. Person-centered is where you may follow a specific person or child over time. And when you use that kind of approach, you can then tie in more details about that particular person or child. So they both have benefits, but we tend to take a place-centered approach because right now, for the most part, we're looking at the environment. How well is the environment supporting diverse play, and in this case, also risk-taking and behavior. So the other thing I want to just highlight is we've been doing this behavior mapping for quite a while, and we tried to use existing play typologies that were out there, and they just didn't work. They didn't work outdoors because most of them were developed for capturing indoor behaviors and for very different means. So what we did is over a couple of years, we developed a new outdoor play typology, which here we've set it within a behavior mapping framework. It can stand on its own. If you use the QR code, you can link to our full paper on it. It's an open access paper, so anyone can download it. And it explains not only our framework, but really what these different play types are. So the first four across the top are actually ones that are essentially just a synthesis of existing ones that were out there. But what we found is the ones at the bottom were ones that were largely missing from those typologies, and ones that we really were seeing in outdoor play. But as well, the initial ones over there, we sort of expanded them to make sure that we were capturing what's that full range of, wider range of behavior you might see in an outdoor play space. So particularly we added bioplay. So this is particularly outdoor environments when children are playing while interacting with living things. So this is from plants to wildlife. Expressive play, which can be when play involves artistic expression or performance, or they're playing with language. It can even be, telling jokes and rhyming, things like that. Restorative play, which is one that we tend to forget about. We tend to forget about that, those sort of quieter, more sort of passive activities that happen within play. We see them quite a bit within a kind of a whole play episode. And then we found that we do have to try to capture digital play, because we're starting to see it more and more. Not only people bringing in devices, but there are some play spaces that are embedding digital sensors, for example, in their play spaces. So the topo is this typology, but also within a behavior mapping framework. And I'll show you in a minute what some of the other variables that we capture and we're able to look at. So just in terms of the children that were observed during this time, we had a little over 800 in total during that week, but 90% of them were under 9 years old. And we had a sort of a 60-40 split in terms of male children versus female. And this is these are all kids, all ages in this space. So every dot, every point represents a play event that was observed. And that point you can think of as having sort of a little database underneath it. So it has all kinds of information. And we use a geographic information system platform, and it lets us sort of change the symbology of those dots or look at those points in against any of the data that those points have attached to them. So this is just all the points, but you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, this is a heat map which shows the density of those points. So the closer it gets to red and then to yellow, the more dense the points. So you can see from this where were the the really popular spots. Where did we see most of the activity across that week? But for this study that we are currently doing, you'll hear more from Rachel and Mariana's group. We are doing a group paper right now. For this, we just looked at the 3 to 8 year olds in the study, and actually the proportion actually flipped. So we now have 40% males and 60% females, but they represented about 76% of that full 800. If you look at the chart on the pie chart on the left, you can see, you're probably wondering why the numbers add up to more than 100. With our play typology, we capture up to 2 different types of play for a single play event, because we found that a lot of times play behavior really incorporated characteristics of more than one play typology, and this has really helped us capture play in a much better way. But of the play that was observed, 60% of them involved a physical play component, and 60% involved an exploratory play. So those were our 2 dominant types within this age group. So for the risk-taking behavior, the attribute, the variable that we have been using, we adapted from Helen Little, who had developed an observational typology for looking at children's risk-taking behavior. And the thing that it does is we don't capture the specific type of risk that's happening. We sort of capture the intensity of it, and whether it has positive components, and that's either at low, moderate, or high, and then also negative ones at low, moderate, or high. And it also lets us capture when children are sort of exploring risk. So they might approach some sort of play opportunity and kind of assess it and back off. So similar to what the previous speakers were talking about, we can actually observe and capture that. So this typology was not validated by Little, but we've been working on with it quite a bit, and we found it's been really helpful for us capturing risk within play, outdoor play that we're observing. So what you're seeing here is now we're looking at these play points, just those that involved, those that involved either positive risk, those are the big green ones, no or very low risk, those are the black ones, and then the negative risk. And you can see there's just like 1 or 2 peeking out there. We actually only had 5 instances of negative risk across all the observations. So the majority of it was positive risk, and you can see a lot of it is happening in that upper and lower creek area. But at the same time, we're seeing it pretty, there's opportunities obviously across the whole play space that are providing some positive risk opportunities. If we look at how this sort of broke down, you can see on the left kind of the breakdown of that expanded set of categories. You can see about 47% were for no or very low risk. We condensed it in the bottom one just to put all the positive risks together. So we had about 52% involved positive risk, and then less than 1% involved negative risk. And the chart on the graph on the right shows how that risk sort of was involved in the different play types. And so you can see some of them, physical play with rules, had a lot more risk involved, but we were seeing it in some play types where we wouldn't normally expect it, perhaps imaginative, expressive play, even in some of the restorative play. So it's really helpful to see it's not just, we always tend to associate it with just that physical play, but we do see this behavior across different play types. So what we're doing right now, and along with we are comparing to the work of Rachel and Mariana, which you'll hear about shortly. You can see on the left, these are all the different variables that we captured during our behavior mapping. So details about the child, for example, what sex they were, what kind of group size and peer interaction the play involved. We capture communication that's happening. We capture adult interaction, activity intensity, basically sort of environmental interactions, whether they are engaging with loose or fixed natural parts or loose or fixed manufactured parts. We do also capture the topography where the play event happened and the ground surface. So doing more to try to capture those environmental features. So we did some regressions analysis. So put all this in with positive risks and said which of these factors are really associated with positive risk and maybe are sort of a bit predictive of positive risk taking place. So if you remember that we said of this age group, 60% were female, 40% were male. We still found within this, and which actually still surprised me, there were still many more of the male children that were engaging in risk. So female children were 40% less likely to have exhibited positive risk in the behaviors we observed. But activity intensity, two of those levels also were certainly associated with positive risk. So any kind of movement, really. So even the slow, easy activity, almost 60% of it involved positive risk. And it was 5 times more likely to involve risks than the more passive stationary. Not that surprising. But the moderate to vigorous or really fast activity, almost 80% of it involved positive risk, and there was a 25 times more likely to have positive risk associated with sort of this more intense fast activity. Not that surprising, but it was coming out really clearly in the results. One thing that was very interesting, though, in our study is there was a pretty strong association with natural elements. Now, obviously, this is a very natural area itself, but 60% of the play that involved natural elements also had an association with risk, positive risk, and were 8 times more likely to involve positive risk. And you can also see, so the blue elements here, the blue dots are where we have both positive risk and natural elements. And you can still see that's actually quite, it's really concentrated in that creek area, but it is actually distributed quite well across the space. So this natural space in lots of different ways through its natural elements was providing positive risk. The other thing, this is one thing that we've been really interested in exploring that. As we've been seeing, and we really thought this was contributing to positive risk, is the topography of the space. So, flat versus slopes, sort of unevenness of the ground. And so here you can see roughly we've taken out like all the different parts of our space, which ones where we have some steep slopes, moderate slopes, no slopes, and then uneven areas. And then when we looked at where play was happening, so the purple points here are those that involved steep or uneven topography. And actually, I'm missing those little labels on the right. So if it was a steep slope, 40%, 43% of them involved an element of positive risk and were 7 times more likely to exhibit positive risk. But our uneven surfaces, 91% of those uneven surfaces involved positive risk. And so on those uneven areas, there was 33 times more likely to see positive risk happening in those places. So this is an environmental characteristic that we don't always look at and capture. And a lot of our play spaces don't have a topographical variety. And so this is just reminding us this is very, very much part of the picture. So just I'll wrap with a couple key takeaways. So we saw a couple of things that are aligning with what other studies are showing, which generally shows that these outdoor natural play spaces can really support the challenge and the complexity to provide some really interesting risky play positive opportunities. It was certainly associated with physical play, physical activities, and movement, particularly those faster and more higher intensity activities. Some of the new insights are in this space, the connection with both fixed and loose natural features, which is great to see. And then this really strong association with varied and challenging topography, particularly these sloped and uneven surfaces. Some surprising things, though, is we really expected that peers would be a part of the picture, and we didn't find any strong association with peer interaction or the group size, whether kids were on their own or whether they were in small or large groups. There was no strong connection. And a lack of strong association with other outdoor play types. It was certainly there, but only physical play had that extremely strong connection. And we're still considering we expected more of an impact from the adults interaction. We've seen a little bit. We're still kind of figuring out what that is, but it certainly didn't come out as strongly as we thought it might. So this is something we're hoping to keep investigating as we move forward. So, and with that, so thank you for listening, and look forward to stay as long as I can to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loebach, and you reminded me that you do have to head off soon. So if there are any questions for Dr. Loebach right now, we can field a couple of questions. And then if there are any remaining at the end of today's webinar, then we can forward them your way, if you don't mind, after the fact.
Yeah, and I apologize for that. This was set long time before we had this this conflict come up with our field work, but hopefully you can understand that we're doing more to get more data to keep expanding on these results. So.
Yeah, and we appreciate that contribution. Nora, you mentioned that there was one question in the chat so far.
Yeah, so someone asked, what are some examples of non-play?
So yeah, non-play we do capture because we systematically capture behavior. We have sort of this protocol for your kind of scanning as you go around a play space. There will be times that a child's in a play space but not actually playing, and so this might be when they are, taking nutrition, they're eating or drinking something. Sometimes it's when they're in distress. We have a category that's self-care, so they're tying their shoes, they're tucking in their shirt. They're doing whatever they need to do to, just to keep going. So we see elements there, and that we have about 8 categories of non-play that we capture, and it's in that topo paper. But it's really just those things that happen around play that might happen to be what we are observing, during that short window we're watching a child. So we just make sure that we have a way of capturing that.
Okay, another question is, what is the definition between non-play and restorative play? Was it easy to recognize the difference between non-play different from restorative play?
Oh, yeah, it's very, very easy. So restorative play, there's a couple of, like, each of the main, so we have 9 primary play types. Each of them has a set of subtypes. So under restorative play, we have resting, we have retreat. So as many of you know, if you look at, if you're studying kids in outdoor spaces, they'll often sort of pull themselves away from the action for a little bit, especially if there's a little fort, there's a little den, they may sort of pull themselves away to the side or the edges and kind of watch, just sort of maybe regulate. And so we call that a restorative form of play. And we really see it as part of, it's really part of overall play episodes. It's not really separate. So you may see that and then they re-engage. So, but it also might be reading, might just be doing some quieter activities. And so when it's really most helpful when we're pairing 2 types of play types together. So when you have, restorative piece associated with another play activity, we actually get the kind of a fuller picture. But we do see quite a bit of restorative play, and it's very distinct from non-play.
Great, cool. And I think there's a couple of questions here. I've never heard of bioplay. Can I hear some examples of what bioplay would be?
Yeah. So that's because we just invented it a couple of years ago. And this was one of the main things that we said. We didn't have a way of capturing this kind of play. So you consider a child, I mean, we saw it in the videos, in the first one a little bit too. This is when a child is playing with, say, for example, they're playing with a caterpillar that they see, and they might be caring for that, they might be moving for it, they might just be watching it. They're interacting with that. But we also see them interacting with plants, very often like sensory plays. They might be feeling the texture of plants or smelling them, or sort of incorporating them in their play. So particularly in outdoor spaces, that engagement with play and wildlife, particularly, it's often paired with, say, exploratory play, where we see them really examining and sort of interacting with those living elements in the outdoor space. And you can get more examples of that in our paper.
Cool. Okay. The next question is, where is this play space located?
So it's the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. So this work was done in Santa Barbara, California. So I want to be conscious of not taking up too much time for questions. So I'm happy to move on, and I'm going to stay around as long as I can, but also happy to engage with anyone outside of the webinar.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, we will move on. But Jenna, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, and for fielding some of those initial questions. I'm sure that there will be more to come. But like I mentioned, in the interest of time, we will move on to our final presenter. Rachel Ramsden is a PhD candidate in the School of Population and Public Health at UBC, and a research coordinator in the Play Outside UBC lab led by Dr. Mariana Brusoni. Rachel's research investigates children's outdoor and risky play using mixed methods, participatory planning approaches that engage young children in outdoor space design. And with that, please welcome Rachel.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Want to just let me know if you can see it?
Yep, you're all good.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to present to you today a bit about one of our most recent projects called the Promoting Early Childhood Outside study. And I'm really grateful to be invited to share some very recent results. So this will be kind of the first time sharing some of these learnings. I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And I live, work, and play here, and am grateful for the land in which I reside on today. So today, as I mentioned, I'm just going to touch briefly on a bit about our study. Janet, actually, we've been working really closely with, so you've got a great introduction to the methods. So I will not spend too much time on that, as we use the same methodology that Janet used in her study. The difference is we actually looked just in childcare centers in the Greater Vancouver region, working with 3 to 5-year-old children. And then I'm going to share some of the results from our study, as well as some of the learnings and promising practices that we learned throughout our study. So first of all, our team, we have a really large team here at the Play Outside Lab that worked on this project. Dr. Mariana Bersoni is the principal investigator on this project. Professor Susan Harrington is a professor in the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC, and her students contributed to the outdoor built environment modifications as part of this study. Dawn Mount and Christina Han are also some research coordinators on this project. So we worked with the YMCA of Greater Vancouver. 8 childcare centers participated in this study. And then we also, as I mentioned, had the support of the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. So the Promoting Early Childhood Outside study, we, as I mentioned, worked across 8 childcare centers in Greater Vancouver. We collected data through observational behavior mapping, as Janet spoke to, and we used a place or a center-based approach. So our team scanned the outdoor play area, and we would record 15-second play observations using the same variables that Janet has talked about. So that topo tool, where we looked at play types, we measured activity intensity, risk-taking behavior, and we, across the 8 centers, we spent about 30 days at each time point. So we collected time pre-project, so kind of that baseline where all these 8 centers at currently. And then we actually went in and collected data after we did this really robust project at all 8 centers. And we collected data twice after the project for 4 of the centers, and once for the other 4. So we had quite a big team, about 12 on our team, and various individuals that would support collecting data. So this is some photos of us in the fields collecting, and then also some of the built environment modifications we did. And that's Dr. Mariana Bersoni watching as we put in this beautiful cedar structure that the landscape architecture students did. And just I guess I'll just say that we had about 200 children as part of the study, so across the 8 centers, so quite a few participated, which was really great. And most of our centers were flat, and they all had fences. Some were above grade, so rooftop centers, and some were at grade. So our centers were, I would say, different than Janet's, as she just mentioned. We were structured childcare centers, many of which had fixed times that they were going outside, either in small groups. Most often is what we saw, groups of 8. And most of our centers had about 25 children enrolled at each time point that we were there. So I'm mostly going to be talking about our baseline data and the results we found from that point in time. But the project itself, we did a really comprehensive outdoor play project at each center. We looked at an outdoor play policy. So that were things, how much time are they spending outside, all the way down to one of the things we worked on was, removing the need for children to wear shoes outside. So that was something that we found across all centers was kind of an unwritten rule. And we kind of worked with the centers to incorporate, some of the flexibility of allowing children to play outside, whatever their comfort level is. We worked with educators to train on, risk-taking, outdoor play, loose parts. So we did a really comprehensive educator training practice. And then the outdoor environment modification, we worked with the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, as I mentioned, with Susan Harrington and her team. And each center got a really comprehensive built environment modification, including loose parts. I have some examples I'll share in the next few slides. And then we engaged the parents and the families in, some engagement events. We did planting with them and really tried to bring parents into the outdoor space. And this was really important because this project actually occurred during COVID. So we started in September 2021, and parents often had never even seen the outdoor space at their childcare center. So it was a great way to bring them in and really showcase what we were doing. So if you want to read more about the methodology of this study, because I did go over it really quickly because Janet did such a great job with hers and giving the intro to the methods we used. We do have a paper published, and you're welcome to read up a bit more on the way we kind of administered the project and how we evaluated it. And so, as Janet mentioned, we also used Helen Little's categories of risk-taking behavior to measure risky play and risk-taking. And she provided the full comprehensive list, and I just provided some of our more condensed categories that we used. And so we looked at no risk or very low risk, then positive risk, and also negative risk. And we looked at this for the purposes of the paper that we are working on with Janet's team as our outcome variable, and then to see if activity intensity or play type or any of the other variables we collected were associated with positive risk. And we really wanted to see, how do children play and what contributes to positive risk when at childcare. So with that being said, I'm going to showcase some of the results that we found from the time one, so the baseline of our study. And it's really, I'm going to show some maps, and it's where do children participate in this positive risk-taking behavior outdoors. And so just to provide, we collected a bit of context. We provided 1,726 play observations across the 8 centers at time one. So we collected quite a bit of data. As I mentioned, it was about 30 days of data, and we were really lucky in that we got a variety of weather conditions. So we're out there in the rain. So we really got to see not just what does risk-taking behavior look like in the sun, but also when it's wet and cold out. And we saw about 16.5% of all play observations had positive risk-taking within the play activity. And across the 8 centers, you can see that this varies. So we have each of the centers, we've just kind of labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And we have the lowest center is Center A, had only 9.8% of their 215 play observations had positive risk-taking behavior present. And then we had some centers that had quite a bit more. So Center E, for example, had 21%. And so this is an example of a center. Center E had the highest percent of positive risk-taking behavior. And this map showcase where these activities occurred. So the green dot is positive risk. So that is, as mentioned from Helen Little's categories, that can include, jumping off of something that's a bit high for a child relative to their height, but it's not, a dangerous activity. This is something where the child is maybe stepping outside their comfort zone, but they're getting that thrill, that excitement. The negative risk is the red dot, and that's something that we would flag as, although it might, they might be jumping off something or doing something with an element of risk, there's a negative, higher chance of injury. There's a dangerous component that we flagged. And then the black gray dots is just a general activity where there was no risk or very, very low risk. So as you can see in this one, a lot of it clustered around the play structure with the slide, and actually kind of just off to the side of the slide. And we're kind of investigating some of these specific points, like what was occurring. But right now we just kind of picked out the trends. And same, there's a playhouse just to the left of where I've circled, and a lot of risk-taking activity happening there as well. And then at this center, this was one where this center had 15.2% positive risk, so kind of in the middle. And again, we saw a lot of positive risk occurring at the play structure, but this one was a little bit more spread out. And this center, again, it was had low slope or flat topography, but had quite a bit of natural elements and some uneven surfacing like boulders for children to jump off of. And then again, we saw some clustering of positive risk at the play structure. And we'll talk a bit about why this might be occurring, because we did see this at multiple centers. But I'm going to save that for our learnings. And then the center was one of our largest centers, and we found that the positive risk was actually quite spread out at this center. Something to note is this is one of the only study center sites that had a steep slope. So all of our other centers were quite flat or had low slopes. This one had a hill, and we did find that children would participate in positive risk at this area. And again, the kind of circle I've showcased had this steep slope, and children would run, or sometimes we even saw them trike or bike down this slope, and it allowed them to move a lot faster than if they were on a flat or low slope surface. And then this center, something of note that we saw here, and I've actually outlined the ground surface at this center just to kind of showcase what we saw. The center was actually a rooftop. It was on the 6th floor of a quite dense urban center, and it was very flat, and the children would kind of cluster on these concrete planters and jump off onto rubber surfacing. And that's where we saw actually quite a bit of the positive risk-taking behavior. So where I've circled there, and it was very interesting for a very, flat or low slope center. The way that the children used these raised concrete planters, which I think originally were implemented just for planting purposes, were actually used as kind of a way for children to climb and get up higher, because they didn't have a lot of that opportunities elsewhere. And then this center had, again, I've highlighted the different ground surfaces here. And we saw quite a bit of spread out positive risk-taking behavior. So it kind of canvassed the whole center. And to note, the big thing here is that a lot of the positive risk was happening on non-concrete surfaces. There are a few on the concrete surfaces, and we kind of dug in, and I would say most of these are from the trike path. So children were riding their trikes or bikes really quickly. But aside from that, most of the positive risk-taking was happening on dirt or mulch or sand or wood decking. So things that were not the concrete. And then for this center, just of note, and it's similar to what Janet found in her study, when we look at just the positive risk-taking behavior, so I've taken all the green points and then actually looked at what type of play is happening in those play points, we see that most are physical play. And so that's kind of the gross motor, vestibular, balancing, rough and tumble. So things where children are really using their body either actively or in that gross motor activity. And so that's a really important finding for us. And it's something we saw across all of our centers. So a red dot is physical play and a positive risk-taking behavior. So our findings, and we, as I mentioned, are writing this paper with Janet's team, and we are looking at what did we find from childcare centers, and Janet's team is looking at their more of an open park space, so very different settings. And we found that children had increased risk-taking behavior when they participated in physical play, so same as Janet's group. Also, when they are participating in slow, moderate, or fast activity intensities versus when they're stationary. And so even slow movements contributed to positive risk in comparison to stationary. And something that was different than Janet's team is we found that when children interacted with fixed environmental features, such as those play structures with the slides, again, we saw some with planters and trees, those contributed to more positive risk-taking. And we're kind of hypothesizing why this might be, but we think because our centers had quite this flat terrain and they were very structured with adults always present and watching, that the play structures were kind of the only thing possibly that children were allowed to do with risk-taking. And so it's something we're trying to unpack a bit more, but the environment is really going to offer risk-taking opportunities, but combined with educators' roles, there's sometimes those unwritten rules, right? Like children are only allowed to jump off the play structure, but they can't jump off these other elements like loose natural logs that are brought in. So that's just something we're trying to unpack a bit more as part of this paper. And then we also saw that risk-taking is decreased when children participate in restorative, exploratory, or imaginative play. And we think exploratory risk-taking might be decreased because we saw most of this happening in the sandbox when children are kind of digging or feeling the sand. It's a very stationary activity. And something that we were looking at, maybe if we incorporate more loose parts like tools, we can increase risk-taking behavior or positive risk-taking behavior when children are more stationary. So how do we kind of bring those elements in? And it's something that we did as part of our project. So I'm giving a few examples of some of the environment changes we made across these centers. So here's a before and after of one center, and we just increased circulation to the sandbox. And also the stairway became kind of like a stage where children would jump. They could bring more things into the sandbox like tires. So things that afforded more opportunities for positive risk-taking. And then, as I probably shared earlier, we had this large climber that we implemented through Susan Harrington's team, and that provided, something that was a very flat space, an opportunity to jump and climb. And then even just incorporating very small, wood cookies or stepping stones, ways for children to interact with the nature was something that we looked at and did across most of our centers. We input water features, so ways for children to interact with natural elements and kind of that, sense of independence for children to interact on their own with water. We tried as best as possible to incorporate challenge. So there was, again, as I mentioned, mostly flat centers. So ways for children to get up a bit higher and things that were movable so that it didn't look the same every time. Like a play structure might every time the child's doing the exact same thing, trying to find elements where there was variety in the ways in which children can interact with challenge. And then lots and lots of loose parts. So things that we could do, tools, ways in which children could be stationary but still interact and participate in positive risk-taking behavior. So really quickly, I know I probably only got like 1 more minute, Louise, and I just want to show we have 2 examples of a kind of what we saw post-project from time 2. And these are from the first 4 centers that received this project. We kind of, I'm showing kind of the maps side by side, but this is one center where we saw risk-taking change. In particular, with the addition, this center got this climber. And so we can see that positive risk-taking behavior really changed in this space. It was very underutilized beforehand. And then with the implementation of this natural structure, we saw it just clustered positive risk-taking. Children jumped, they climbed, they interacted with this space quite a bit more. And then we also saw in the sandbox a lot more positive risk-taking. And I haven't highlighted it here, but it's another cluster just nearby. And that was really, we think, from the addition of new loose parts and tools such as play kitchen elements and knives and things that are safe for children to use, but they can kind of interact with when they're stationary to increase risk-taking behavior. And here's one other center, and this one's just an example of like the increase that we saw in positive risk-taking. So at time 1, this was one of our lowest centers. It had not very much positive risk-taking. And then at time 2, we saw it quite a bit more spread out. They were interacting with more elements, and positive risk-taking increased. At time 1, most of those green dots are actually just from triking and biking, so on the trike path. But in time 2, it incorporated a lot more different types of risk-taking or risky play. So jumping, playing with loose parts, even watching risk-taking, so vicarious risky play. And then, just our learnings, something, again, we're working with Janet's team and comparing and contrasting. And I think one of the big learnings here is that most of these centers are flat. So there's no steep or moderate or uneven ground. There's a few here and there. But really the importance of thinking about how children can interact with heights. And that doesn't have to be, you have to modify the whole center, but, how can you bring in things where children can get up high? Most of children's lives are spent looking up. And so how is it that we can get them to look at their space from kind of that bird's eye view? So that was a really big learning for us, in that we didn't see an association with topography, but that's just because we didn't have that variance of topography across our centers. And then I guess the other thing just to highlight was, the importance of educators. And so we actually didn't find that adult influence impacted our findings. We didn't find an association with adult interaction, but we think that's mostly because adults were always watching in these centers. So children were hesitant perhaps to participate in positive risk-taking behaviors, because even if an adult wasn't interfering with their activity, there was that sense that, an adult is always watching. And so this really comes down to, in early childhood education centers, how can we make children feel independent and support them to participate in positive risk-taking experiences? I just want to quickly share our website. So if anyone wants to check out the progress of this study, they're more than welcome to. And you can definitely get in touch with us. I want to thank everyone on our team that's contributed to this study. And please check us out on social media. We love sharing updates and love getting questions. Thanks.
Rachel, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers. That was such a great combination of talks. I don't know about everyone else, but I've been like, very rapidly taking notes on what this means and for future projects and how to adopt. So I'm sure that whether or not you want it or not, you'll probably be getting some questions from those in the audience, and I think that's probably a good thing. So we do have 13 minutes for discussion. Before we get to some of the questions, I thought I'd just take a couple minutes to ask both Rachel and Alexander, what big win do you think would really help advance the field of risky outdoor play, if that's just for kids or for parents, educators, researchers? There's a big win that you wish could be accomplished.
I don't know straight away, but maybe if we see the small children, which I research, as competent and let them make their own decisions in a varied environment, I think that would be really good if we could shift that focus instead of saying be careful all the time. Just let them explore and take their own decisions.
And that really came through in your video, hey, of that first child that was uneasy with that cliff and then scooched down on his bum. Like you see that with adults on a ski hill all the time, and kids learn from a very young age.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I will just build on that, because I think it is seeing children as competent, but it also takes a community. So it's the family and the educators, but it also has to be reflected in policy and practices so that educators and parents feel supported to allow children to participate in risky play. So I think just seeing our study where we were looking at structured, childcare centers, the policy piece was so important for educators to feel supported to support risky play. So I think it really is kind of starting higher up from a community to feel that the full support for risky play is there.
Yeah, and we're lucky here in Norway because in the national framework it says that we're supposed to give the children opportunity to explore risky play. So we're supposed to do it.
Wow, that's incredible. And actually, to that point, Rachel, what I was curious about when you were showing that you introduced, that wood structure in one of the spaces where previously educators, weren't okay with kids even jumping off of planters. Like, how did educators interact with that introduction of those risky pieces?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to the project itself. So I think because educators knew that this project was happening and we did all this training and we worked with that organization on kind of a policy, it was this really comprehensive support system for educators to start to get comfortable with these changes. And so for the example of the planter and children jumping off, that actually occurred at time 1, so at baseline. So before we even implemented any changes, but from that example, children were just jumping off the planter onto the rubber surfacing. So it actually wasn't, it was a positive risk, but it wasn't as much positive risk or as high of a risk, I guess, as could be seen potentially at other centers. And so when we had kind of in our project, we implemented kind of the arches and the rolling wood structures. Those actually provided a lot more risk-taking activity than the planters themselves. And those educators were a lot more fearful of those at first because there wasn't the rubber underneath. So it was almost like the rubber surfacing provided this, okay, there's this safety piece and I'm good. I can kind of be comfortable with this. So yeah, it was a really interesting thing, but I guess for me, I would just say from the project perspective, like the training and working with the educators from the start over 2 years really helped them slowly get comfortable with risk taking. It wasn't overnight, right? It was the baby steps to kind of introduce and then feel okay and comfortable and confident to support that type of play.
Very cool. I see we have a question from Sydney that you mentioned the training for educator and curriculum. I'm wondering if this type of training is available for the public. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So if it's if those that are caregivers and educators can access this type of information, do you get any sense?
Was that
Sorry,
for
I
me?
muted myself there. Oh, sorry, I muted myself, but I'm back. Yeah, so one of the tools that we did was our outsideplay.ca tool, and I'm happy to provide that link into the chat. It's just outsideplay.ca, and educators can go through, and it's free. You can go through kind of your journey with outdoor play and learn a bit about some of the resources and tools that we shared as part of this project. And then the other training we did was really internally through the organization, the YMCA of Greater Vancouver. So that training isn't necessarily available, but it's definitely something if you're looking to get some extra training or your organization wants to host something, we are happy to kind of let you know the type of content that was covered and support how your organization or yourself as an educator can get more resources.
Thanks for that. And Alexander, I'm also curious, the risky play component that's built into policy in Norway, is that something that's publicly available and in English? Do you have any sense?
Yeah, I think so. I can double check.
And do you have any sense of, like, I'm wondering if even if it's built into policy, if any educators have ever been hesitant in supporting risky play in Norway, despite it being already built into policy, right? I wonder, we're saying we need to get it into policy, but if it's already there, is there any then pushback at the educator level?
Yeah, definitely. It's an increased safety focus here also. So it varies on the staff members whether they are interested in it and actively supports it. But it varies a lot, yes, from kindergarten to kindergarten, even though it's in the national framework. So we have to work with it actively, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I see there's a message here from Joe. He says, thanks, Rachel, leveraging the evidence research on risky play in a socio-ecological context framework is essential, where its place in policies entrenched across sectors, not just ECE policy. As we know, this gives risky play a legitimate place in policy across civic institutions, supports new investments, and allows for new programmatic opportunities. Thanks for that, Joe. Oh, perfect. And the Norwegian framework plan. Thank you, Ellen, for finding that. That's really great and useful. We have about 4 minutes left. I don't know if there's any burning remaining questions. Oh, I see here, I think that some of the pushback comes from what is perceived to be acceptable risk. As an educator, I am more liberal with what is acceptable, but it's hard to explain that to a parent if there is a minor incident. Amy, I'm just going to mention, because I know from some of the work that we've been doing with Andrew Fleck Children's Services, that what we've observed is that when parents sign their children up for a forced nature school program, for example, parents are more accepting of the fact that there is a level of risk, but for whatever reason, when they sign their kids up for like more traditional indoor focused program, there's this assumption that injury doesn't happen indoors. And so there's a lower tolerance of injury risk, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because how many on the call today were told, you know, as a kid, if they were running around inside, like, go outside, you're going to get hurt, right? Because there's hard surfaces and corners and, you know, and tile and pointy things inside. So just an interesting observation there. I don't know if Alexander or Rachel, you wanted to speak to that at all?
Yeah, it's definitely more rules indoors, and the indoor space is often constructed for sedentary behavior and not explore and let the children use their bodies. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement in the indoor spaces and the rules indoors.
I see. There's one question asking for tips on gaining access to educators for training in this area. We find it difficult to present at professional development days, convincing the powers that be to provide training. Yeah. Rachel, I feel like you can speak a little bit to that, to training in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we've been seeing is that there's been more and more requests for risky play training from actually from municipalities and cities across Canada. So that's been really reassuring. I think we're getting there. I mean, it's slow, but I think you know, we're always happy to provide resources. It's just and our lab in Mariana Bressoni also does a lot of presentations and workshops, but you're right. It's, you know, getting the buy-in from the community or the families, the center, the city, the municipality to really support this type of work in their policy and practice. So I guess for tips in terms of from the child care center point of view, I just think the organization or the even the licensing officers, we had them part of the project for whoever the licensing officer was for each of these centers was invited to be part of the project. And we had buy-in from them from the get-go, and that was really important. So I think it really comes back to that community model of needing the support of multiple, you know, the family, the childcare center, the community, to really push this work forward. And I guess it's happening. It's slow, but it is happening. We're getting more and more requests to talk about this from the higher levels, right? The cities, the government.
And not to pat myself on the back, but I think, you know, doing small webinars like this, just getting that research out there, having opportunities to engage with those that are on the ground, you know, addressing those gaps in knowledge through the research. So I might wrap it up with that, but thank you so much, Alexander, Rachel, and Janet for your great conversations and presentations. Like I mentioned, this has been the second 2/3 of the presentation has been recorded, and we'll be posting that recording on the Outdoor Play Canada YouTube channel, and we'll be promoting that through social media as well. So thank you to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.